Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I am Dr. Brad Reedy, and today is Tuesday, February 6th, 2024. Tonight, we're going to be talking about Al-anon, Coda, and other 12-step meetings. I really love this topic because I think that for a lot of people sitting on the outside of the 12-step program, there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of stigma. There's a lot of issues that I think can be cleared up because for me, the 12 steps are just good, sound principles that are found in virtually every kind of therapy and spirituality. And so, again, I think making it a little bit more accessible, a little bit simpler and closer to home, and really making a strong pitch today for those of you who want to do the work where psychotherapy might be out of reach financially. This is an offering that is free, that is everywhere, that can be done online or in person, nearly all the time. And there are other piece of it that are advantages over psychotherapy because you can call your sponsor or other group members in a crisis and emergency virtually any time and get some support and help. And you can't always do that with your psychotherapist. So before I get into some of the details of tonight's broadcast, I'm just going to again re-announce the returning to you. We have these once or twice a year. I typically will run these. This is if you've been to Finding You and you want to come back and you want to recharge, to reconnect, to recalibrate, returning to you is that option. It's the sequel to Finding You. I wrote in The Journey of the Heroic Parent this process of returning back to yourself. I wrote through this process, I found myself again each week. It's very difficult to find yourself until you're found by somebody else first, my therapist told me. The root of ourself is almost always found through another person. That is, when someone else finds us, we come to find ourselves. And then also in the book Parenting from the Inside Out by Siegel and Hartzell, new research is cited on the brain as well as recent parenting studies to explain how greater self-awareness in parents can lead to healthier attachments and healthier developments in children. And they say research in the field of child development has demonstrated that a child's security of attachment to parents is strongly connected to the parent's understanding of their own early life experiences. As a parent, making sense of your life is important because it supports your ability to provide emotionally connecting and flexible relationships with your children and with your partners. The basic premise, and I think if you've done your work, I think this is obvious and self-evident. The problem is that many therapists, the vast majority of therapists, don't do their emotional work. They learn about therapy, they study therapy. Some of them, many of them, are very bright. They get certifications in various approaches and techniques. But if you've done your own work, if you've done your own healing, if you've grappled with addiction or depression or anxiety or self-sabotaging behaviors, and you've been able to make your way through it to some degree, you know what you need. You know you need compassion. You know you need a safe place. You know that virtually every relationship that you have, every context, every situation is colored and affected by the relationship that you have with yourself. That's very clear to me. In fact, I think it's not just to me, it's to a lot of people. And I believe that the myths in history, the great stories in history come back to this idea of knowing yourself as the key, as the foundation for all the other work. So it doesn't matter what your challenge is, the foundation of it, the basis of it is the relationship that you have with yourself. And that can be best discovered or developed in a safe context. So that's my pitch for returning to you. Our specific program is March 6th through 10th. I think we have a spot or two left. Like I said, I'll be running this one. I may not run them after this. So if coming to one that I run is of interest to you, this might be your one. So let's get into tonight's topic. Let me first start to talk about codependency. I could give a talk on codependency every single broadcast because it's so elusive and so difficult to define. Because again, it's a way of being. It's a way of being in a relationship. It's a way of seeing yourself and your relationship to other people. Codependency specifically is a pop psychology term. It has not been adopted formally in the diagnostic manual. In fact, there was an argument that it should be adopted in the most recent diagnostic manual. James Hollis tells this story. But the concern that the insurance companies and the lobbyists had was that if that if codependency was in the diagnostic manual, that virtually everybody would qualify for it. So again, it's a continuum. We're all on it somewhere. Some of us have it less, some of us have it more, but we're all on the codependency continuum. It's the word doesn't make sense because it's not really codependency. I think that comes out of the idea that where they first started to describe this was with the spouses and family members of alcoholics and drug addicts. And so this idea of codependency was that the non-identified patient was co-participating or codependent with the addict. But I want to be clear. You don't have to have anybody in active addiction to struggle with codependency. And like I've said, everybody's on the continuum somewhere. It you don't need a qualifier to be codependent. That's one of the phrases qualifier that they use to talk about, like, when you go to a meeting, who's your qualifier? Who's the alcoholic in your life? That's the historical language. But you don't need a qualifier. You can be codependent. I've said this before. I can be codependent with the mail carrier. I can be codependent with the flight attendant on a flight. I can be codependent with a stranger walking by. I don't need a qualifier. And if everybody I knew and had a relationship on earth disappeared today, I would find new people to be codependent with, or new people to demonstrate the lack of awareness, the lack of differentiation, um, the lack of self growth that I have. It would be played out in all my relationships. Codependency is not dependency. I want to be clear. Again, I wish that wasn't part of the word. I wish that people would just talk about it as an attachment wound, an attachment issue, because that's really what it is. It's not about being dependent. Everybody on earth needs to depend upon other people. One of the things that differentiates human beings from other species, other animals, is our ability to successfully rely on, depend upon each other. The house that I live in, the computer that I'm using right now to broadcast is built upon the shoulders of millions and millions of people, right? That's our success, is that we band together. And that urge to come together in codependency and this particular disorder we're talking about tonight, that some kind of wiring gets off, some kind of training gets off, some kind of programming gets off, and we get confused about our relationship between ourselves and others. So it's not dependency. Dependency is a human issue that everybody experiences, especially children. Nor is it too much love or intimacy. I think some people think that at the end of the continuum where codependency becomes more severe, I think it's a pleasant idea. I understand why people like this idea that it's just too much love. It's not that either. If it starts to become, quote unquote, too much love, it becomes something else altogether. You can't be too free of cancer, right? You can't have too healthy of a heart. You can't have too clear of a vision, right? You can't have those things. It's the opposite of love. In fact, it's more like abandonment than anything. That's what the child or the person experiences it, because in codependency, the selfhood of the individuals is fused, becomes cloudy. I was thinking about this outside of the context of this presentation tonight. I was thinking about a case or a situation. I was thinking this idea that so much of what I see in psychotherapy as a therapist is that people don't understand that the only life they have to live is theirs. I say this on these broadcasts, and maybe it's hard, especially for newer parents, but your children's life is not yours. It is theirs. And our job is to figure out how to position ourselves best in the relationship to support the child on their journey. But because of what we have been taught about relationships, about being human, and that's how fundamental it is, we get confused about our relationship with other people. We think we need to constantly coach or correct or control them. We think that our anxiety and our fear that comes up when somebody's struggling or demonstrating addictive or self-harming behaviors, we think that that anxiety is a product of love, and it's not. Love is patient, love is kind. Love is grounded. Love is clear. Love is courageous. Love is, in some sense, the opposite of fear. So if we get anxiety, and all of us do, all of us get anxiety and fear. Every human being gets that sometimes. If we get that specifically as we observe or interact with somebody that we care about or love, especially a child that we are charged by the design here of taking care of them, of supporting them in special ways. If we get triggered, if our anxiety and fear gets triggered, and we start to operate and act from that place, it's really hard to do it well, to relate well. So we have to own our anxiety. We have to manage it. We have to take care of it. The reason that we ask you to go to these meetings or to go to psychotherapy is not because you're the cause of all the world's problems, but because that's the place that you need to go to get support. You need to vent and say things to your therapist that you ought not to say to your child ever, or to your spouse possibly ever. That's the place where you take care of yourself, so that when you show up to the relationship, having previous to that moment taken care of yourself appropriately in a healthy way, if you show up to the relationship with the people that you love, especially your children, now you are available to take care of and support them on their journey, to attend to them and support them in the ways that are appropriate for you to do so in that situation. Codependency is not too much love. It's not enough self. Again, if we grew up in families, and all of us did, where there was some confusion about boundaries, we don't know where we stop and somebody else starts. I was just mentioning casually to my brother, and I've shared with you that my brother is one of my dearest and closest friends in the world, 2 years younger than me. And that took some work, by the way. A lot of work on my part, of making amends for the way that I treated him when we were children, because I thought a typical big brother, but it's just a euphemism for being a jerk. I was with my brother and his wife. My wife and I were with them this weekend, spending some time with them, and I was talking to my brother about somebody, about something, and I said that I said, I think you'd like that person because they don't get all up in your business. He's not a therapist, doesn't go to therapy. And he said, "What do you mean get up in your business?" I said, just become intrusive, just ask you every question in the world and want to know everything that's going on with you and kind of press you, kind of invade your psychological space. And my brother said this, and he's not a therapy client. He said, "That's the way I am with my daughter." He has a teenage daughter that's the same age as my daughter. He said, "That's the way I am with my daughter. I ask her all the time how she's doing, how was her day, how was school, how are her friends, what's going on." And he said this to me. He said, without me prompting him, he said, "And I'm hearing you, and I'm realizing that's what I need, but that's not what she needs." And we were walking together, so we weren't in this very serious conversation. But I turned to him and I said, "Rob, that's amazing that you recognize that." I spend time with clients all the time, just trying to get them to see the difference between their needs and the child's needs. So when you think about connecting to your adolescent child, what you need for connection may not be what they need for connection. You might want information and data. You might want to understand what's going on with their feelings and everything inside of their head. And they might need the exact opposite. They might need distance, separation, individuation. In fact, developmental theory suggests that that's exactly what they need. So while you're asking questions and probing, they're feeling violated. And because you're the big person, you can stand on this kind of authority based on your age and your role and say, "Why are you so distant?" When it is you who's creating the distance because you're not meeting their developmental needs. You're trying to take care of yourself. And by the way, it is at their expense. But when we learn a new way, when we heal, when we take responsibility for our own fears and anxiety and stop asking our children to carry it, we make ourselves available to intimacy. The opposite of codependency is differentiation or individuation. And only in its absence can there be intimacy, the absence of codependency. Codependency is a block, a barrier, a departure from intimacy. It's kind of a pseudo or a mutated form of it. It's when I read about intimacy from the psychodynamic therapist, they talk about respecting the person's otherness. My favorite quote, I wrote a whole chapter about it in The Audacity to Be You. Gandhi talks about otherness. If you can love the other as an other, you've taken on the role of your own differentiation. You've taken on the responsibility of your own journey. So codependency is a confusion about what it means to be a human and to be in a relationship with another person. And it comes from our training and it comes from our developmental trauma. That is our small t trauma. That is the way that we were raised, what we were led to believe. When I've talked about this before, I want to say this as clear as I can. In the literature, especially around addiction, they'll talk about healthy detachment. In Greek terms, they talk about this idea of disinterested love. That's what they mean by healthy attachment. In Buddhism, they talk about non-attachment, but they're really talking about healthy detachment. Buddhists really mess this discussion up because what we call attachment in attachment theory is what a Buddhist would call an unattachment or non-attachment. Okay, so it's confusing. The words are the same, but they mean something different. Healthy detachment is used because that's what it feels like for most of us who come from this paradigm of codependency, of fusion, of enmeshment, of boundary confusion, right? It feels like distance. And what happens in healthy detachment for the person trying to practice it? Anxiety goes up because we've been using the other person to manage our anxiety, our control, our domination of the other person as a way to manage our own internal state. So the phrase healthy detachment is really should be called healthy boundaries. That's what it should be called. Healthy psychological boundaries. That's what healthy detachment means. And when I was asked this question some years ago, and I've shared this story before, somebody said, you talk a lot about detachment. When are you going to talk about intimacy and connection? And I thought about it for a bit and I thought, I am talking about it all the time. Healthy detachment, in terms of psychology, in terms of attachment theory, child development, healthy detachment is healthy attachment. It's the exact same thing, perfectly synonymous. They overlap 100%. Healthy attachment is healthy detachment, and vice versa. I love what my daughter Emma said about codependency. She said, codependency is the illusion you are taking care of others when you are really taking care of yourself. That's the insidious part of this. Going back to my brother's simple example of asking his daughter 1,000 questions. He thinks he's doing something for her and for them, and he's really just doing something for himself. Or the way that my wife says it, if you don't feed yourself, that is a metaphor for if you don't take on the responsibility for your own life, for your own journey, for your own individuation, if you don't do the things for yourself that are your responsibility, like manage your own fear, your own anger, you will, she says, rightly so, you will end up eating other people. If you don't feed yourself, you'll eat other people in relationship. You'll ask for things from them that you're supposed to do for yourself. And while this might sound very, again, it might sound very stoic and rational, it is also absolutely beautiful. It's the most romantic thing that I can imagine to practice healthy detachment, to practice disinterested love, to love the other as other, to heroically take on the responsibility for one's own journey so that they can be available to the people that they love. That's why I say at the end of this, that's why I thank you for it on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you for doing your work because you're making yourself available. And the culture's not going to teach it. It is not out there. I mean, it is if you're reading a lot of self-help and psychological stuff. It's out there for sure. But just the dominant culture that's out there, it's not out there. And there's a very large percentage of therapists and self-help writers that don't understand this and don't get this either. There are some who do, of course, but there are plenty who don't. Codependency is looking for external solutions, changing, controlling, fixing others, fixing a struggling child. Codependency is looking for external solutions to an internal problem, specifically a lack of peace and serenity. So, if you can think about it this way, if we can get parents and individuals and couples to do their work, to take on the responsibility for their own journey, to manage and at least own their own feelings, own their own anxieties and anger and sadness, own that stuff, we make them, they become available to intimacy and relationships. They can then see the other person as other. I love that one quote I read years ago. I don't know who said it, that said, uh, the first thing you should know about me is that I am not you. Everything else will make a lot more sense after that. I was telling somebody today, one of the reasons why I can't go to my mother at this age today and share with her a struggle that I'm having, she wouldn't know what to do with it. She would have no idea what to do with my struggles, my anxieties, some of my habits that I may, whatever it is, my fears. It would be outside of the scope of her training. But the people that I love and spend time with, they know what to do with it. And if they don't, I don't want to be around it. I don't want, on top of what I'm already struggling with, to carry somebody else's fear and anxiety and management of me. Codependency is a pop psychology term that refers to the attachment wound. The result of the attachment wound is that individuals outsource their serenity to others. In other words, I feel how my child is doing. Or, like I often refer to the old adage that's crazy, you're only as happy as your least happy child. That idea that is sometimes held up as an ideal for everybody to strive for is the most powerful example of codependency, of unhealthy boundary violations. It's a lack of love. It's a taking from the other person. The opposite of codependency is differentiation or individuation. Recovery from codependency doesn't cure. This is a key point as we go into tonight. Recovery from codependency, if you were or as you will heal and improve along that continuum away from codependency and toward individuation and differentiation, as you heal that, you don't cure anybody else's addiction. Recovery from codependency doesn't cure anybody else's addiction. Professionals would be wise to avoid teaching or implying that recovering from codependency will resolve anyone else's problems. That is the initial problem with the codependent thinking. If I sit here and give you tools that if you follow, that I attach some guarantee that your child will be better, I am not prescribing the solution to this. I am prescribing the problem that caused it in the first place. The only thing that healing your codependency does is heal your codependency. Now, having said that, when you are in a more healed place, when you are more in a more grounded place, when you are taking responsibility for your life, you are a more effective, powerful parent support. You are a more capable partner to support your partner. So there's a linkage there, but to assign simple cause and effect is to commit the original sin in the first place. That I'm in control of you, and that if I get it right, everything will be just okay. That's the poison, not the cure. I shared a couple of, or brought a couple of quotes from Abraham Tversky's book Addictive Thinking. The most convincing theory, he writes, on how addictive thinking develops was presented in a 1983 article by Dr. David Sedlock. Sedlock described addictive thinking as a person's inability to make consistently healthy decisions in his or her own behalf. He points out that this is not a moral failure of a person's willpower, but rather a disease of the will and inability to use the will. The peculiarity of addictive thinking, he says, is the inability to reason with oneself. It is not, it is in our training, it is in our psyche. I love what James Hollis said. He said, when you come to midlife, you become aware that the chief obstacle in the way of everything you want is who you have become up to this point. And that's why I can't tell people what to do. It's not because I'm doing some clever technique, but because to really heal, you have to transform. You have to see the world differently. You have to think differently. You have to get rid of the old answers that are inadequate and find new answers to life's most important questions. This is one of my favorite stories that 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 Abraham Tversky shares, because it ties our children, our partners, the person that's the identified patient, back to our work. He said the mother of a young man who was destroying himself with alcohol and other drugs could not understand how he could be oblivious to the disastrous effects the chemicals were having on his life. She asked for help in dealing with him. But don't tell me that I have to put him out of the house or that I should not bail him out of jail, she said. I don't want to hear that. Tversky responded, please tell me how much is 2 plus 2, but don't say 4. She had been unable to see that her own thinking was no less distorted than her son's. At the end of every broadcast, as a matter of business, I encourage all of our families, anyone listening, to try 6 of the 12-step programs that I'll be talking about tonight. I don't follow up, which is beautiful, because I wouldn't want the shame of not following through on a suggestion of mine keep you away from the next session or the next contact, the next broadcast, right? But the same excuses that we have for not going and doing our work as the non-identified patient are the precisely exact excuses that the addict has, that the person in our life suffering from the more obvious disorder has. I don't need it. Those people are different than me. I can do this on my own. I don't have a problem. The list is the exact same. So one of the things that I talk about in this work, if for no other reason, even if it's totally useless in the end as a tool for you, I invite you to go. If you have somebody in your life that's struggling with self-destructive behaviors, I invite you to go to a meeting so that you know what it feels like to walk into a meeting, a group full of strangers, and to be asked to expose some of your darker secrets, some of your issues, some of your failings, some of your struggles. And if nothing else in the meeting helps you, you will now have a little bit more empathy for the courage that one must summon in order to do this work. Everybody listen. I say the same thing to therapists, by the way. And over the course of my career, I have very little success with inviting therapists to do their own work, because their defenses are well polished. And they definitely, as a group, really enjoy keeping the pathology at arm's length away from them. So it's not new for you. It's not new to the non-professional. Many people struggle with it. Attendance at a 12-step support group means that you acknowledge the need for help. While many of the groups, such as Al-anon, Codependency Anonymous, Adult Children of Alcoholics, and Families Anonymous, may have been created for those in relationship to an alcoholic or drug addict, the essence of the work is about being in a relationship with other human beings. Replace alcoholic or addict with loved one who is struggling. In the most general sense, it is about being in a healthy relationship with anyone. It is about how to be a self and how to create intimacy with other selves. So let's talk about the 12 steps. Let's talk about the core curriculum, if you will, of these meetings. First of all, it's to recognize that you're powerless, that your best efforts, that your best thinking has got you, that you have a pattern, a habitual way of thinking that brings you back to the problem over and over again. It's not Powerlessness in the sense that nothing you do can make a difference because, of course, in that sense, you're not powerless at all. In that sense, checking yourself into treatment or going to a 12-step meeting, getting a sponsor, choosing not to use is within your power in a certain sense. But on another level, if there's no transformation, if there's no change, you will continue to exhibit the same cycle over and over again. The higher power, the idea of God, can be very off-putting to somebody. I encourage people just to put that on pause. I know other people have other suggestions. Some people call the higher power the group of drunks, God, right? The support system. Some people call a higher power, it could just be the sun, the universe, whatever works for you. And I agree with that philosophy. But for now, I just put it aside. It's just life. It's just accepting life as it is, accepting the way that life works. And anything else is delusional. Anything else is bordering on or leading to psychosis. It's not dealing with life the way it is. So it's just for me about a radical acceptance. That's what the Buddhists call it. A radical acceptance of what is. There's an important part of this work that's about community and about belonging. It's about connection. The great thing about 12 steps is you walk in there and you share your story, and inevitably people are going to relate to you. They're going to have a sense of what it feels like to love somebody who's struggling and slowly killing themselves. They know what it's like to feel guilt and shame around every corner, to feel helpless and powerless to do anything different, to try solution after solution after solution and not find any peace. They know what it's like to make a lot of mistakes and to come to terms with those mistakes. I'm not sure that it can always help. Church can be a great place of community and support for some people, but my experience with the church that I attended, and I'll just say it that way, was that we put on our best clothes. We told all of our success stories. We didn't talk about the ugly fight and the ugly things that my wife and I said to each other last night. We didn't talk about the addiction, the codependency, the depression, the anxiety, the medication that the psychiatrist has prescribed. We didn't do that in mine. And if you get that from your church community, wonderful. Sometimes we need to be with other people who've been through what we've been through. That's one of the gifts of going through this is you get to be there for other people. And I'll talk about that later on. So I encourage people, find people who've experienced what you've experienced, some version of it. You go there to listen to their wisdom, to the people that are farther along the path than you are. And then you also go there to share your story, to give hope to other people, to offer strength and your experience to other people. It can be really valuable. If it starts to resonate with you at all, getting a sponsor is a really good idea. This is a volunteer, and if somebody who volunteers, but this is the important thing to mention. Being a sponsor is a part of their recovery. So if your codependent self worries about the burden that you might be placing on somebody, remember this. Being a sponsor is integral to somebody else's recovery. Find a sponsor that can help you, can teach you, can help you be accountable for the steps that you want to make along the way. Then give you knowledge about how it works. Then give you direction. They can help you in a crisis, like I mentioned. You can call a sponsor at 2 o'clock in the morning and they're up for it. Your therapist might not be up for it. And lastly, being a sponsor is part of the 12 steps. It's the 12th step. It's giving it away. It's why I like to do these broadcasts. It's why I like to do psychotherapy. I learn every day. I'm reminded every day of the work because I'm sitting watching people struggle and I'm offering support, and it's the exact same struggle that I have. I might be farther along the path than the clients I'm working with. I hope so, because you can only bring people as far as you've come. I might be farther along the path, but it's the same struggle. And I'm going to struggle with the things I'm talking about tonight. I'm going to struggle with that in my personal life this week. You learn you learn the difference between trying to control everything and to transcend it. To realize that my daughter was talking about her friend last night, and she was saying, "My friend is such a good problem solver." And I said, a person after my own heart. I love problem solvers, right? They take a situation, they don't bury their head in the sand, they find a way through it. They take responsibility for their lives. It's a day at a time. There's so much anxiety that gets created by projecting forward all the possibilities, by future tripping. And the 12 steps encourage us to slow it down, to not bite off more than you can chew, and to take it a day at a time, sometimes shorter. I remember I had a client ask me years ago. She had a severe abuse history from her family of origin. Severe, horrific. And one day in admiration, I simply asked her, I said, I don't know. I'll call her name Amy. I said, Amy, I don't know how you do it. And she looked at me as calm and as grounded as could be. She was 16. And she looked at me and she said, I don't know how you do it. How do you do it? And I didn't tell her my story. She didn't know what I was struggling with, but right away I figured out for the first time in my life what they meant by one day at a time. At the time I was going through a divorce, my children weren't living with me at the time because of the divorce. Their primary residence was their mother's, and it was breaking me apart. And how did I do it? I did it one day at a time till the next time I could call them at night or see them. There's got to be a surrender and a humility to this. That's really what the 12 steps are about. And humility, remember, humility comes from confidence. That's the most misunderstood aspect of humility. It comes from feeling good enough about yourself you can ask for help. People that aren't humble don't feel good about themselves. They have been taught erroneously by their upbringing, by their context, that to ask for help is weak or ugly or will lead to them being rejected. Probably nobody said that to them out loud. But what happened was their needs were too much for their caregivers, for their parents, for their teachers, for whatever big person was around. And the child interprets that frustration, that exasperation, that upset feeling by the big person. A child experiences that as something's wrong with me. So surrender and humility, those are big deals. You have to have some basis for confidence. You have to know that you're going to be loved. That's why I say one of the most beautiful moments in a 12-step program is when you tell your story. You tell the story of your horrible, rotten self. And somebody in the meeting says, you're in the right place. You can sit next to me. There's a vigilance to the 12 steps. There's a lot of thoughts that there are people that experience the 12 steps as a suppression, a putting down, right? That people are being limited. That's the way some people think about it, and some people experience it. And again, people get to experience it however they want to, or however they do. But really, it's about vigilance. It's saying, look, it's like what my friend said. Best example. My friend in long-term double digits recovery, double-digit years of recovery. He said, if I found out today, he said, if I found out that I was not an alcoholic, the first thing I would do is go and have a drink. That's the best example of what it means to say, hi, my name is Brad, I'm an alcoholic, or hi, my name is Brad, I'm a codependent. Is that I have a way of being, a natural state, a natural gravitation towards something that's not good for me. It's in my history, it's in my wiring, and I've got to be active about it. And really, that's all psychotherapy is also. I may have shared, I don't know if I shared it in this context, but when I was confessing something to my therapist recently about something I was thinking, she playfully said to me, that's the thing about psychotherapy is the news just gets worse and worse. And she was just being playful about it's about you. The fact that my father left when I was 8, that's a true story of mine. That's not gonna go away. I just have to deal with it. I have to see it in front of me. Keep your friends close. Keep your enemies even closer. Keep your strengths close and keep your weaknesses and your dents and your bruises even closer. Keep an eye on them. Keep it in front of you. I have certain ways, proclivities about dealing with stress and problems and fear, and I've got to be aware of that. There's a vigilance to it. There's a genetic predisposition and there's an environmental predisposition. There's a ritual and a culture about the 12 steps. It replaces the rituals and the culture of addiction, of codependency. You go to a place where people are thinking differently, talking differently, looking at problems differently, looking at solutions differently. One of the greatest challenges as a psychotherapist is that people ask me questions constantly, typically about what do I do, which I can't answer. But the premise of the question itself is the things that needs, I mean, it's the foundation. That's what these broadcasts are. Yes, I talk about some of the same subjects, but the point of these is I'm talking about a way of being, a way of thinking, a way of reasoning, a way of looking at the world. Rituals and culture, interdependence. Interdependence is the healthy form of dependency that I was talking about before, that we rely on each other. We support each other. I can ask for help. Fosters that healthy dependence. You know, secrets and disclosure. You don't have to tell everybody everything, but it would be really nice if you could tell one person everything. If you don't tell one person everything, and I think psychotherapy and I think the 12 steps, that's why there's a lot of confession in them. And I know some religions have confession as a part of their work. It's important to kind of test that out and to say to somebody who's loving and patient, non-judgmental, not anxious, and to confess and to have them respond with, yeah, that's how people are. That's how you are sometimes. And the non-charged response opens up an entire new world to the individual that's confessing. They're not now some ugly pariah monster. They're just a human being. And human beings, when they are scared or stressed, we do silly, dumb things. You have to deal with the thing that you're not dealing with. A colleague of mine wrote something last night that I shared on social media, and she said the vehicle to your serenity, to your liberation, must pass through the parts of you that you're trying to avoid. That's about as simple as it gets. You have to deal with it. And of course, the empathic support and treatment without judgment. Let's go over the 12 steps, the core curriculum. Step 1, we admitted to ourselves that we were powerless over alcohol or another person or drugs. I'm going to say alcohol throughout the broadcast, but you can substitute another person or others or drug, whatever is your favorite drug of choice. We admitted to ourselves that we are powerless over alcohol, that our lives have become unmanageable. That's a surrender. That's a humility. I'm teachable. My best thinking got me here. I need help. It's not a weakness. It's not a lack of accountability. It's not an abdication of responsibility. It is an absolutely courageous, heroic statement. It's self-esteem that's born out of the acceptance of our fallibility, not the conviction of our greatness. If you don't accept your fallible, human, imperfect self, or don't get it accepted by somebody somewhere, it's going to be really hard to do this work. You're going to constantly be trying to run from what is. One of my students said to me years ago, I call him Jimmy. He said to me after reading his letter to his parents, he said, you and my parents have taken away all of my freedom except for my choices. And I thought that was one of the most profound things. At the end of the day, you can't choose whether you have a certain response to alcohol or drugs or whatever it is. You can't do that. But what you can choose to do is not drink and go to a meeting, not give your kid a lecture and go to a 12-step meeting, not cancel your plans so you can be available and on call with your child and go ahead and attend that meeting and press do not disturb on your phone. You start to learn what's inside of your control and what's outside of your control. If you don't know this, the 12-step meetings almost always have a serenity prayer at the end. They don't all, but many, the vast majority of them end with a serenity prayer, which goes like this: God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Ask yourself, why is that the prayer? Why is that the meditation, if you will, the mantra that has been chosen over the years to be the closing idea? To accept the things I cannot control, the courage to address the things I can control, and because it's so easy for me to get confused, I have to also ask for or meditate on the wisdom to know the difference. As a parent said to me one time, I think we both need to surrender, meaning me and my child. I need to surrender believing that I can fix them, and they need to surrender to the problem that's right in front of them. The second step, come to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Again, if you struggle with the idea of an objective personage, if God's sitting there in the most literal sense, if that is an objection to you, you can try a Buddhist perspective or even an atheistic perspective of higher power. The Buddhists call it radical acceptance. In Taoism, the Tao is the way that the world works. In Star Wars, it's the Force. In my spirituality, it's the universe. It's life. If certain conditions are met, this is what happens in life. And if the conditions change, circumstances change, things are going to change. It's indifferent. It's just the way the world works. If I go around lying all the time, I'm not going to have good relationships. If I go around telling the truth, I'm going to have very few relationships, but they're going to be good. Surrender. This step is about surrender, humility, dealing with life on its terms. It's replacing fear with faith, realizing that, like Yoda said, that fear leads to anger and anger leads to the dark side. That's what George Lucas was trying to illustrate. And when your child is using heroin, when your child is self-harming, when your child is refusing school week after week after week, that produces anxiety in any parent that I've ever met. And instead, you can look at it and say, okay, this is what's before me. We have to attack this with different kinds of thinking. We have to do something different. Some lesson is here for me, and I don't know what it is. But I know I need to address this head on. And I could escalate my leverage. I could use more authority. I could try to use power and control and domination to get my child. I could treat them as a behavioral problem, or I could take a drink out of a deeper pool and understanding that their symptoms are messengers and that if I can learn to listen to them, then we all get the wisdom that they have to offer. And we start to realize after a while, we will be okay because we are okay. Step 3, made a decision to turn our lives and a will over to the care of God as we understood Him. Again, learning to trust. Like I said recently, the bird that stands on the end of a limb doesn't trust the limb. That's not why it sits there comfortably. It trusts its own wings. It knows it's going to be okay. My therapist said it to me recently when I was presenting a crisis. She said, I know you're going to be okay. You always have been. You have what it takes to figure it out. In the end, see what happens when you heal your attachment wound is you're always okay. I mean, you feel sad and scared and frustrated. You feel all the feelings that happens, but fundamentally, you feel okay. And you come to realize that you've been waiting for somebody your whole life to come and rescue you, and you come to realize that that person is you, that you are here to rescue you by doing these kind of courageous things, by taking the risk and letting go of old ideas and old lessons and old answers that don't make sense, that never did. I used to say to students that I worked with in the wilderness program, they would talk about, this idea that I was in control. I said, look, I don't think I'm God. I think I'm more like Isaac Newton. I'm not inventing gravity. I'm just telling you how I think it works. This isn't about your parents. It's not about me. It's not about the program. It's about your life. And your life is getting smaller and you're in conflict. And the very thing that you want, a sense of liberation and power, you're getting less and less of it along this path. So maybe we can start to think about things differently. Yes, there is pain and anger, and it's real and deserved. But maybe we can talk about feeling it and dealing with it instead of trying to prevent it from happening, which is what their parents have taught them, right? You prevent the pain, you prevent the hurt, you control things. I used to use the example of Bewitched. When I was a little kid, if you're of a certain age or you've seen the more recent movie, you know the premise of Bewitched. Right? There's this woman that was a witch and her husband, and they wanted to live a normal mortal life. That's what they used to always say back in the series that was in the 60s and 70s. And I used to say to kids, I said, drugs are kind of like having a. I would say to them, first of all, I would teach them the premise of Bewitched. And I would ask them, why did Darren and Samantha, why did they aspire to having a life without magic? What was the goal? And we would talk about that. And where I would help them get to is I'd say, if you can just have a magic wand and wipe away the bad, the challenge, the pain, the discomfort anytime you want, can you see how that would ruin your life? There was a very not very good movie several years ago. I think it was called Click, and it was with Adam Sandler. And he could press fast forward on this remote control that he was giving, and bypass every unpleasant thing in life. Waiting at the DMV, sitting at a graduation in the sun for hours, waiting for your child to be celebrated with the presentation of their diploma. You name it, anything. A bad conversation, you could fast forward it just like you could using a DVR and TV. And of course, the lesson was at the end of it, his life was empty and shallow and meaningless because it was the struggle and the pain that gave his life meaning, where meaning was sought and found. So if you give a child a magic wand, you should probably run away because stuff's going to get weird and not very good right away. And then I would say, now imagine if you gave some enlightened person a magic wand. And I used to say, under my breath, I would say, maybe they even have a magic wand. If you gave a 5-year-old a magic wand, how would you feel? And of course, you would feel really uncomfortable. But what if you gave the Dalai Lama a magic wand? My answer is he probably would never use it, or he already has one. Learning to feel and finding the meaning in the suffering. I used to say to students, I saw this documentary on secondary concussion syndrome. This is many years ago. And it showed this very, very sad image of a young man who died on the football field. In fact, the footage of it was filmed by the father, I believe, or the parent of the child that died during a football game. And the true story goes, is that this young man experienced a concussion and then hid it from his parents and his coaches. He told some of his friends. He still had symptoms. And apparently, if you have a concussion and you sustain another head injury, another concussion, there's a decent possibility of dying. It's very, very dangerous. So I would say to my clients, what would happen if he would have told his coach or his parents that he had symptoms, that he was having headache and blurry vision? And the answer, of course, is they would have held him out of practice and held him out of the game. In other words, they would have, quote unquote, punished him. My friend who loves and is an avid golfer just found out that he had an injury, that he might not be able to play, probably won't be able to play golf until the end of the summer. And he was half joking when he called me today. He said, "I'm not doing very well at all. I need help. I need support. This is bad news." But that's how life is. You either deal with it or the consequences present themselves. You don't know everything and you're not in control of everything. That's what that step is about. This is where it starts to shift. Step number 4 made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. We start to tell the truth about ourselves. We face what we've been avoiding. We face that part of us we've been trying to numb. By the way, there's a lot of it that doesn't need to be anything to be ashamed of. But we heal that idea in the same way that the injury was sustained in relationship to another person. So you start to make this list, and then step 5, admit it to God, to ourselves, and to another human, the exact nature of our wrongs. You confess it. You tell somebody. And again, if you are my client, if you're in our intensives, our response is, okay, we hear you. We understand. Makes sense. Even relating and say, I've done similar things, or I do similar things, or I struggle with similar things. You let it go. Instead of this guilt and this disease is a disease of guilt and shame. This codependency, this addiction, it's a disease of guilt and shame. And the way out of it is to confess it to somebody who can lovingly respond to you. There's a saying in the 12 steps that you're only as sick as your secrets. And what they mean is if you don't talk about it, it's going to fester and get worse. In the closet, things turn into monsters. Step 6, we were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character, and we humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings, is number 7. It's about the process of change. We let go of it over time. It's painful. It takes patience. We have to learn to feel things that we weren't willing to feel. We have to learn to do difficult things that require courage. Clients that I used to have would spend all their time trying to convince parents or the staff, and I would say, the way that you convince us is by not trying to convince us. This is not for us. This is for you. Parents would ask me, has my child internalized it? I even have spouses ask me, does my husband, does my wife, have they internalized it? And my response is, we'll see. You'll see by the way that they are going forward. Again, humility, surrender. The change is slower. It takes the rest of your life. If you taste the sweetness of this work, if you do this work that I'm describing today, you'll just want to keep doing it your whole life. You know, if I finished my PhD, I've thought about that. I said this to my therapist today. I graduated from my PhD decades ago. And if I just stopped there, I'd be like, I guess I could be like a lot of people. It's like going on a diet, getting to an ideal weight, or getting to an ideal, when I ran races, and getting to an ideal time for my race that I want to get to. And then if I quit after that, it doesn't benefit me. It's a lifelong process. It's slow. It is slow. And the more work you do, the more you realize there is to do. But there's less shame and guilt. That's the crazy thing. But because there's less shame and guilt, you see it more. Because the guilt and shame doesn't help you get better. It doesn't help you improve. It doesn't help you get healthier. It keeps you sick. Step 8 and 9. Made a list of all the persons we had harmed and became willing to make an amends to them all. Step 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. So we learn to make an amends. We learn to apologize. We learn to give a proper apology. We learn to own our part, not ask for forgiveness. You don't ask for forgiveness with an apology. You give the gift of your ownership, your accountability, and the person who's receiving it gets to choose whether or not they forgive you. But asking for forgiveness, that's for your ego. That's for your needs. And it feels cheap and shallow. and somehow selfish to the person on the receiving end. They can't name it because the words seem right. But the energy is, I need you to like me and deem me a good person again. Step number 10, one of my favorites, continue to take a personal inventory. And when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. I mean, shoot, if we could all do this as parents and as partners, I would be out of a job. It takes confidence, right? It takes a sense of self. The strongest, most courageous people can't apologize. Narcissists can't apologize. People that are threatened and struggling with mental illness can't apologize. This is a way of being that's different. It's the journey. And you're going to have regression and you're going to say stupid things. You, mom and dad, you, husband, wife, partner, you're going to say stupid things. I'm going to say stupid things later tonight. It's part of the deal of being human. Step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understand Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. Again, it's getting in alignment with your highest self, with the divine in all of you. Being silent, practicing being with yourself, understanding that inside of you, buried beneath the shame, the fear, the guilt, the shoulds and the shouldn'ts, there is this wise, caring, kind person. It's just covered up by all this wounding and all this scar tissue. I love The Reader, the Daily Reader, written by Melanie Beatty. The language of letting go. I think she does a marvelous job and gets it right all the time. And finally, the 12th step. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Service. I really like it, the 12th step. It is the 12th step, especially for those that struggle with codependency. And by the way, I believe that codependency is the root cause of addiction. I believe that those who aren't treating their codependency while they're treating their addiction aren't going all the way. There is a root, fundamental disconnect about what it means to be a human in a relationship to others and the shame and the guilt that comes along with all of that. That's what people are medicating. And the substances that they're ingesting are an attempt to get the feeling that they had if they felt safe and connected, if they felt seen and understood. They're just doing it chemically, whereas codependence is doing it by trying to control other people, by trying to get everybody to be same instead of other. And that's where the service part comes in. Remember, you ask for help for these folks. You ask for a sponsor. If you walk into a meeting, people will introduce themselves. They'll ask you if you want names and phone numbers. It's part of their sobriety. It's part of their journey. It's part of their healing. So like I always say, we ask you to go to any combination, 6 of any combination of Al-anon.org, Coda.org, familiesanonymous.org, or adultchildren.org. I wanted to end with my favorite slogans from the 12 steps, specifically from Al-Anon and Codependence Anonymous. If it's hysterical, it's historical. In other words, if our reaction to a specific incident, moment, trigger, behavior in somebody, if it is oversized, big, if we become dysregulated, that's because it has some history in our programming, it has some connection to our history, to our programming. So if I freak out on you because you didn't pay attention to me, I'm dealing with my father wound, right? I'm dealing with abandonment. I'm dealing with rejection. I'm dealing with judgment. I love the saying, my serenity is my responsibility. If I could give one mantra for this evening, it would be that, for you to repeat that every morning, to post this, take a picture of this with your phone. Put it on the corner of your mirror where you get ready in the morning. My serenity is my responsibility, not my child's, not my partner's. Like I've said before, it's not my job. And I thought it was. And I had been taught it was. It's not my job to make my wife happy. I thought that's what a good husband was. But it is not my job. It's her job to make herself happy. And What's good for the goose, as they say. It's not her job to make me happy. That's my job. It's my responsibility. And finally, what others think of me is none of my business. That's why I'm much, much, much more selective about the people that I spend time with as I grow older. Because if I spend time around people who are constantly telling me what I should think and feel and do, it won't last for me. It won't work for me. We just ask you to try. Just try it. It changes people's lives. And if nothing else, you know the kind of mountain you're asking your loved one to climb. Just go for them. And then if you like it and it works for you, stay for you. Find the core of the message. Don't get distracted because your child has autism and they're talking about alcoholism, or this woman is talking about her alcoholic husband and you're talking about your 16-year-old self-sabotaging, self-harming child. The details aren't the thing. The ubiquitous nature of the issue is there in the message. Listen to it. See if you can hear it. See if you can find yourself in other people's story. See if you can find your truth and make your decisions out of that. Divorce isn't an answer. Sending your kid away isn't an answer. Bringing your kid home isn't an answer. Staying married isn't the answer. The answer is you. And out of that comes the decision about who you marry or who you don't, who you stay with or who you don't, what boundary you set with your child or not. But if you think the solutions are the things that you do, you will miss the message. It's a different way of being. Consider a sponsor. Consider sharing in a meeting. If you've gone to a few, consider sharing. If you keep going, consider a sponsor. Many people say that's the essential part of the program for them. And listen. Remember, as my friends in addiction will say over and over again, my brain tells me to do things that aren't good for me. I have to learn to listen to people, to listen to another way of thinking and being. It's developing a different sensibility. But to do that, you have to surround yourself with a different sensibility. All right, folks. My two books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, which do not mention the 12 steps in detail, but it is the same principle. The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You are available on Amazon and Audible. If you want to do a deep dive in your own work, our Finding You option is February 21st to 25th. I think there's one spot left for that. So get on that if you want to do that. That's going to be run by my daughter, Emma. You all know what a big fan I am of her, not just as her father, but as her boss. As her boss. March 8th through 10th is our next online offering. It's half the time and about a third of the cost. So if time and money are a scarce resource right now for you, then the online option is wonderful. And then, of course, I mentioned earlier, returning to you March 6th through 10th. I'll be doing the Finding Connection workshop starting tomorrow. So this will be my last broadcast for this week. We have custom offerings for couples and co-parents and families. Just contact intensives at evoketherapy.com to find out more. We have support groups, ongoing support groups for current and alumni of our wilderness program, February 8th at 7 p.m. That's Thursday, 7 p.m. Mountain Time. Once a month, we have an alumni-only meeting of our wilderness program, February 19th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time is that offering. And then once a month, we have an intensives and coaching support group, February 12th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time is that offering. If you have questions, you can email us at supportgroups@evoketherapy.com or go to our website. We have coaches. They can work with you virtually. They can support you in this work. They can support you before and after your intensive or aside from your intensive. Codependency, transitioning home, marriage issues, trauma, the whole gamut. We have therapists and coaches with a wide variety of backgrounds that can help you. Contact coaching@evoketherapy.com to find out more. All of these broadcasts are available on Spotify or your favorite podcast app. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast. You can also go to soundcloud.com on your computer and search and listen to us there. You can go to Evoke's YouTube channel and watch the video rebroadcast of these episodes. And you can find Evoke Therapy Programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on X, Threads, and Instagram using the handle @EvokeTherapy and @Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. You can find Evoke Therapy Intensives on Instagram using the handle Evoke Therapy Intensives. And on Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, our blog has wonderful content each week. All right, folks, I hope this was a helpful point of contact. Um, I hope it gives you something during your week to buoy you up and to reconnect you to yourself. And I hope that you feel that I'm on this journey with you and that I'm not separate from you on this. My next broadcast will be February 13th. Like I said, I'm running the intensive this week. So this will be my last broadcast for this week. So a week from tonight at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, it'll be a live form. Any leftover questions this evening, any questions you want to send in, suggestions, you can always email us. You can ask copies of slides, always ask copies of our slides by emailing us at webinar@evoketherapy.com. Thank you for joining me this evening. Thank you for on behalf of the people that love you and the people that you love. Thanks for showing up and being willing to do your work. It makes all the difference in the world. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.